EastEnders has been on our screen since 1985, every year since having a full dossier of episodes with no holidays in between. The exception being a small break in 2020 when the world shut down. Soaps are a rarity in TV. There are no breaks, no holidays, and no cut-off point for the year. Since 2001, they've produced 4 episodes a week, which totals to around 210 episodes a year. Therefore, with over 7,000 episodes in its entire catalogue, there's no surprise that some storylines were scrapped or abandoned, whether it simply didn't fit with the direction, or was too dark to air at the time, or perhaps the writers weren't ready for the backlash. I'm Piggy from Watching Walford, and this is the darkest EastEnders abandoned storylines iceberg. Now, 2 points of clarification. First, we have left a bunch of these ideas on the cutting room floor, so there is enough content for more of these if people enjoy them. EastEnders is quite tight-lipped with these sorts of things, so we are typically working with first-hand accounts, so it's exceptionally hard to verify the validity of these claims. So in a way, this could all be true, false, but most importantly, speculation. We would never make this up, but unfortunately we have to go off other people's information. Julia Smith and Tony Holland were struck with choice paralysis when deciding to choose the name for the show, as they were tipped to build a soap to rival the Great White Shark up north, Coronation Street. They understood that the name would be the first barrier to entry. First off being East 8, which isn't too bad, but admittedly it could be a bit confusing with the number. Then it was going to be called Square Dance, which I think is terrible. Then they toyed with Round the Square, Roundhouses, and London Pride. We're glad they stopped with these names, as the shape names are pretty rough, but London Pride isn't too bad. They operated with the working title East 8 for the longest time, but they were worried about people confusing it for the estate, so they settled with EastEnders, and the rest is history. To keep a shroud of mystery before explaining whose original name was changed, we'll read an excerpt from EastEnders, The Inside Story, a book that detailed the creation of EastEnders. Jack, Pearl and Tracy. Jack and Pearl are not criminals. They're not exactly angels either. Villains perhaps, but he certainly is. They've been married for 15 years and haven't had sex with each other for 13 of them. The marriage is a front for the sake of the pub's image. The daughter, Tracy, is adopted. Maybe for the same reason. They have a dog too, Prince, an Alsatian. Pearl met Jack at school, and they were sweethearts from the word go. Money and things are what interest her. Jack didn't give her these fast enough in the early stages of their marriage, which is partly why it turned sour. It also went wrong because of sex. He just didn't turn her on, or didn't turn her on enough. And she never stops reminding him of how much of a man he isn't. Now we'll give you 5 seconds to think of who this family is. It should be obvious. This is, of course, Dan, Angie and Sharon. It feels wrong to imagine otherwise, but with the actors being the same, it probably would have stuck. Although Dirty Jack Watts doesn't hit the same. Then further, imagining one of the most popular moments of the 90s. Sharongate, move over. It's Pearlgate now. If the show wasn't going to be called East 8, they were definitely going to try and make the postcode reflect it. In fact, Julia even carved E8 into the lot when they met up the square. It was originally supposed to be set in Hackney, which explains the E8 postcode. They would later crank the number up to E19, which wasn't already a postcode, but smartly they decided to change it to E20, which sounds infinitely better. According to Matthew Robinson, the King of Walford, Phil Mitchell, was going to have an injury that would change his life forever. In a welding accident, Phil was going to lose his eyesight and become blind. However, it never made it out of the theory stage. As the question how much it would alter the character if he became sight impaired, we can acknowledge that it would have been truly groundbreaking to take hyper-masculine Phil Mitchell and remove his eyesight. But considering he had been used forevermore for fights, car crashes, and dust-ups, it truly would have removed a facet for the character that the show would continue to use. It would completely reshape the character, with them being very unlikely, especially in the 90s, to keep Phil Mitchell as prominently. I personally find it hard to believe they, despite this condition, would still thrust Phil Mitchell into the leading man role if he was sight impaired. I could be wrong. They would later opt to give Phil Mitchell's son, Ben Mitchell, an impairment in the form of losing half the hearing in his ear, then later losing his hearing permanently, needing a cochlear implant. As for characters being sight impaired, they would shelve this completely, only depicting it in guest characters until 2025, where Peter Beale and Lauren Brannan's baby, Jimmy Beale, would be born with a condition, leaving him severely sight impaired. Beale is the longest running regular character in EastEnders history, with him only being trumped by Jane Slaughter's Tracy, who has been behind the bar and also featured in the first episode. In 2021, he would depart the show to do other projects. Adam Woodyard, who plays Ian Beale, claims he was slated for a return in mid-2022, but this was scrapped and he would only make guest appearances on 2 occasions before his return in August 2023. He would appear as a cameo in the episode that celebrated Doc Brannan's life, with him taking a phone call and setting up a mystery as to which woman he was on the phone with. This would later be revealed to be Cindy Beale, who was returning from the dead. Christian and Syed are one of the LGBTQIA+ couples who have stood the test of time, with them leaving at their peak with seemingly no interest either sides to bring them back. Where Syed would come to terms with his sexuality, which would go against his religion. When they would finally kiss, they would come together in a moment of tension and angst. Christian asks Syed what his problem is, which leads to Syed kissing him. Originally, in a trailer for this moment, Christian was going to ask the same question, and Syed was going to push him against the fridge and kiss him. But this was changed, as the producers opted to keep a tamer version of this moment, with EastEnders being very reluctant to make queer characters front and centre, and regarding the attitudes towards homosexual relationships at the time, we believe that EastEnders wasn't prepared for the edginess of the kiss or the backlash that may have come from it. Matthew Robinson is back yet again, and he imposes another wild storyline. This one would illustrate a circus that would travel to London, but in a freak accident someone would leave the Panthers cage open without making a beeline to the tube, straight to Albert Square to terrorise the locals. Honestly, this is probably my favourite outlandish one. You can imagine the scene where this panther realises that cat is a lioness and starts cuddling up to her. You would have to imagine that this big cat would threaten the lives of Walford locals, with perhaps even one character perishing. Thinking about Matthew Robinson's era being 1998 to 2000, this definitely would have stuck out like a sore thumb. It would have been remembered as one of the first times that EastEnders had jumped the cat. This one is probably the outright most entertaining that I am most upset about never seeing. One of the biggest mistakes that EastEnders has ever made is killing off Ronnie and Roxy Mitchell, with Ronnie's actress Samantha Womack asking the new executive producer to make Ronnie a little happier, for both Samantha Womack and Rita Simmons to be told that Ronnie and Roxy would be getting killed off instead. Ronnie and Jack would get married, with both sisters now orbiting the Brannans. On the wedding night, Ronnie and Roxy would be hanging around a pool. Roxy, coked out of her mind, dives into the pool, so Ronnie in her huge wedding dress follows. Unfortunately, both women's stories would end in this pool, with them both being pronounced dead the day after. There was an alternative scene filmed and put out there, where one of the sisters would be left alive. Ronnie would have survived and pulled her lifeless sister out of the water. There was a leaked image where we would see Jack and Ronnie, the newlyweds, seeing Roxy lifeless on a pool table. It is hard to see a world where the Mitchell sisters survived without the other, but the biggest crime is that they were killed off in the first place.
And so ultimately it ended up with the character being killed.
That decision again
Was
in the
not
soap where you go, let's kill the character, they said we've got to kill it. Did you go, thank God for
No,
that?
I was devastated.
Why?
Because I wasn't planning to leave at that time. I was waiting to meet the new producer. He was coming in. I was excited because I felt like she'd got really dark and really it become over sensationalized. So I thought, with this new guy coming in, great. I'd heard that he wanted to take it back to kind of reality, less murders, less stuff. And I was thinking, great, that's right up my street. And so I met him the first time and he went, yeah, I agree. She's too dark. I said, me too. I think she's so dark. And he said, well, I completely agree with you. So we're going to kill her. And I was like, what?
That's a great way of resolving every
First time
problem,
I ever
innit?
met him. Some of the writers said that they felt unable to write for the character anymore.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had to drown myself. That was really hard, having to kill someone that I loved.
Another questionable idea by Matthew Robinson, who conceived an idea that would change one of Walford's sweethearts forever. Ricky and Bianca are synonymous, even with them not being together since 2012. The relationship's had high highs and low lows, with Ricky being tempted away by old flame Sam Mitchell on many occasions. Both characters are beloved and remembered fondly, with Bianca being annoying but hard not to love, and Ricky being a lovable loser. This twist would change the relationship forever, with no one ever wanting to see Ricky and Bianca ever again. Matthew Robinson considered making the relationship abusive, where Bianca would begin to abuse her husband Ricky, which would change how either character is viewed. It's remarkably difficult to take a well-loved character and give them a storyline that would ruin the character. It would take Ricky and Bianca from a beloved couple to a twisted tragedy, with it hard to imagine taking aloof Ricky and loudmouth Bianca and driving the relationship into the pits. I do believe they could have done a really strong storyline like this, with female on male domestic violence being very unrepresented. It would be extremely hard to turn this around, with a lot of viewers struggling to look beyond the abuse. Ricky would no longer be the lovable fool, and Bianca's actions would be seen as deplorable. Pauline was a character who had a lot of storylines surrounding her that were dropped, but in this instance it would mention Pauline becoming an avid smoker for medical reasons. She would be prosecuted for smoking trees in order to comfort her constant pain. The only thing close to this is when Martin was growing said trees in his allotment shed, which Derek took the rap for. She would have been prosecuted for her drug use, and judging how the writers would treat Pauline, they would take great pleasure in making her do rigorous community service. Everyone knows Barry from EastEnders, and everyone knows how he famously exited the show. In a showdown with his partner Janine, where she would finally snap and push him down the cliff, rolling down and cracking his head on the rock. Barry would try to insist that he felt the real Janine, but she refuses to believe it's real. This would start the theme of Man-Eater Janine, with a man often leaving this earth during all her stints. In a surprising twist of fate, there is a world and an image where instead of Barry on the rocks, it is actually Janine. It was reportedly changed as Sean Williamson, who played Barry, wanted to step down from the show. It is a ridiculous world to imagine where Barry would have been responsible for Janine's demise. This would shut the door on so much fantastic Janine material that we would have seen Barry instead. I refuse to believe a world where Barry has the trajectory of Janine, and if this had happened, he would have almost definitely left and been arrested anyway. What a world we live in where Janine's character is cut majorly short and Barry takes her space. This is a world I don't want to be in. This is arguably the correct decision. Matthew Rose and Steve Owen would have a major showdown, with their fight being broadcast on the 3rd of February 2000. 2 endings were filmed for this showdown, but the first one was deemed too violent, which resulted in it being cut. With a still of this fight being shown, with Steve wrapping his hands around Matthew's neck, this would have been far too racy for the time. Even with Archie Mitchell spending just shy of 2 years on EastEnders, whodunnit was the perfect ending for a character so foil. History states that Stacey was the culprit, but there were multiple endings filmed to keep the actual suspect in the dark, meaning it would not be leaked. All of the options would have the same script and have them act slightly differently. The options were: Max Brannan confesses to Stacey Brannan, Billy Mitchell confesses to Phil Mitchell, Peggy Mitchell confesses to Phil Mitchell, Janine Butcher confesses to Ryan Malloy, Phil Mitchell confesses to Peggy Mitchell, Ronnie Mitchell confesses to Jack Brannan, Ryan Malloy confesses to Janine Butcher, and Jack Brannan confesses to Ronnie Mitchell. The immediate plan was for Peggy to be the one to end Archie, but Barrow Windsor was intending on leaving, so it was changed to Stacey Slater. Even then, Stacey would leave the show soon after. So the real question is, why was Stacey picked? I personally think Peggy was the correct choice in this whodunit. We can imagine that the writer just wanted to build Stacey Slater's character, which did work, but her part in the Archie storyline is viewed as a major afterthought. Not her bipolar disorder storyline though, that was elite. The Lucy Beale whodunit acted as a Renaissance period, where it had a major part of the audience ingrained and desperate to find out who committed this horrific crime. The Renaissance period ended when the culprit was revealed to be the younger brother, Bobby Beale, in what popped the hype balloon, leading many people to decide that EastEnders failed. Now the writers tend to suggest they knew who did it. I would argue that they started the storyline before they knew the ending. It was going to be revealed instead of Bobby that it was Jane Beale, as they wanted it to be a real dark exhibit showing just how far someone would go. This would then be changed to be Lucy's half-sister, Cindy Williams Jr., but in the end they lacked judgment and changed it to Bobby Beale. Now we like Bobby Beale and think they did a solid enough job of it. But even when he returned, the writers did everything they could to remove Bobby from this decision, making him a peaceful, socially awkward Muslim who didn't represent the violent teenager they made him out to be. I think the right choice for this storyline was for it to be Cindy Jr. She was treated horribly by Ian and made to be the black sheep of the family. Alternatively, we know this now, Mimi Keene, who played Cindy, has later gone on to do bigger and better things, so it's unlikely she would have returned. Even then, with Cindy being revived, I think the story is much richer if it's her namesake taking away one of her firstborns. Point in the iceberg, we are getting to the much darker topics, so these topics are going to be much heavier, so feel free to click off if you're feeling uncomfortable. If you don't want to watch beyond this point, I totally understand. I just want to say thank you for watching, but if you want to continue with us, let's dive deeper into this iceberg. Ronnie Mitchell was written into the ground, with the writers refusing to make the character happy. One of her dreams after losing Danielle was to have a baby with Jack Brannan. So when she became pregnant, It was everything she wanted. The writers, on the other hand, wanted it to be significantly darker. On New Year's Eve, Ronnie would be racked with grief, finding baby James unresponsive. This included shots of a distraught Ronnie touching the cold hands of her little boy, and everyone quietly wished it had never happened. Even in discussing this, the baby swap storyline was a horrific attempt at something too dark for pre-watershed EastEnders. There are definitely interesting angles you can take with it, like seeing how far Ronnie's grief would go. But time-wise, it was just wrong, and the wrong move for Ronnie as a character. BBC cut the story short due to over 6,000 complaints, and when they approached this episode, they cut a lot of it and avoided representing such a horrific end to the year. I enjoy darker topics and storylines, but there is no surprise that this one was shut down pretty quickly. It didn't help out the nation was still upset over the Madeleine McCann case, where a 3-year-old girl was kidnapped while on holiday in Portugal. Timing wise, it was definitely the wrong time. Producer Mike Gibbon became the head of the serial in 1989. He pushed for writer David Yallop to create storylines that killed off many popular characters. They figured the decision to axe the characters who were dependent on the talent of the actors portraying them. None of these storylines came to light because Gibbon's plots were thrown out by the BBC. Despite this, in 1991, Andrew Holden, the EastEnders storyline editor, described Pete as almost synonymous with the programme because he was an original, adding that characters like Pete carry a lot of history. Original characters are very precious things. Pete had always seen himself as a family man, and in the future we see him making a determined effort to put his family back together. Whatever happens, he'll always carry a torch for Kathy. According to this, Pete was an untouchable and not in danger of being killed off, which is mighty rich in hindsight. In 1989, Mike Gibbons suggested doing an IRA bombing which would result in an untimely demise for one Pete Beale. It would have been quite insensitive to display these attacks with the Troubles. During this conflict, there were at least 10,000 attacks in Northern Ireland alone. It would have been a needlessly shocking storyline that I don't believe would have been handled well. There is a major reason why all of Gibbons' plans were thrown out. When EastEnders announced they had hired Hollyoaks' notorious Warren Fox, played by Jamie Lomas, it was viewed as a big victory for the show. Quite like Gary Lucy's Danny Pennant, they were severely underutilised. He was introduced as Jake Stone, a recovering alcoholic who would be a love interest for Lauren Brannan, but it was later revealed he was married to a businesswoman called Sadie Young. A tangled web of Jake's lies would unfold, and it would be revealed that Jake and Sadie had been involved in a car accident where they had run over and taken the life of a young girl. This will later be forgotten, with Jake mostly being a suspect in the Lucy Beale case, and Sadie leaving when she discovered Jake's infidelity. This case was never given the time it could have had, with it possibly being a breakout story for Jake and Sadie. Part of me is not surprised that these notorious Hollyoaks actors wouldn't stand a challenge down south, with a lot of people suggesting that modern iterations of Phil Mitchell is just an impression of Warren Fox. As for displays of someone with a killer secret, this wouldn't really be represented and often faced scrutiny. In Hollyoaks in 2009, they would introduce a character called Loretta Jones, who would have been responsible for the death of a 12-year-old girl. But once again, they refused to air this. It would take years for Emmerdale to introduce a character called Ella Forster, where it had been exposed when she was 11 years old. She got into a fight with her best friend Joanne Phillips, which turned fatal. She would never seem to live it down and would exit in 2025, with writers struggling to understand how to write this form of disturbing backstory. It was hit with much less backlash when Emmerdale did it, but like all the others, it never really hit the ground running. Lucas Johnson was an intriguing character, a nightmarish vicar with a dark side. With him accidentally taking the life of his ex-wife, Trina Johnson, he would continue his reign of terror. That's for another video. In June 2010, an episode would show Lucas visiting the red light district and pick up a call girl named Jade before driving her to a remote location and ending her life. Just 1 week before transmission, they decided to drop this death in the wake of real-life murders of escorts in Bradford. Lucas would instead spare Jade by praying with her and baptizing her. Despite these changes, they were desperate to show this on screens, so had him end another escort off screen in order to fake Denise's death. At this point in time, you can look at EastEnders losing its way, the whole laundry list of disturbing and darker storylines that people don't look back on fondly. Intriguing to say that dark subject matter does not mean better, it has to be earned. Ross Kemp spent the majority of the 90s as an emotionally stunted Grant Mitchell, with EastEnders not shying away from abuse in his relationships. However, in 1997, the EastEnders producers pitched at one of the darkest Christmas storylines in its entire history. This would pose legendary character Grant Mitchell and Tiffany Mitchell on centre stage, with their marriage set to hit an all-time low. This episode would have Grant rape his wife on Christmas Day. Tabloids reported that Kemp was absolutely livid over this idea and was going to quit unless it was scrapped. The writers, understanding Kemp was too important to lose, wrote out this storyline, and this fractured the actor's relationship with EastEnders for good. He would stay till late 1999, but then beyond, only to return in very short stints. EastEnders has always been aiming to promote darker storylines and some of the most depraved social issues. However, forcing a lovable rogue like Grant, turning him into an outright sickening villain, would have had unspeakable ramifications for the character. It's hard to imagine he would be able to pop in and out like he does now. You can understand Kemp's disgust at this proposal, and for it to take place on Christmas Day, of all places, would have made it the darkest storyline EastEnders has ever written. Fortunately, this never took place, and now it's always a good time whenever Kemp returns, rather than it being a horrific reminder of one of the most disturbing acts ever committed in EastEnders history. And that's the end of the iceberg, everyone. We know this may have been quite hard to get through, and we appreciate you for sticking around. We still have material for another one of these videos, and we'd love to hear it if you want a part 2. Or a different iceberg entirely. Whoa, EastEnders went down a dark path. But again, if you want another one of these, just let me know down below. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.